Hi, I'm Cal Young, and I'm from Thunder Bay, and I am one of the co-chairs with the PPWG with the OSSU. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge that the OSSU is located on the land we now call Toronto, and that the OSSU operates across Ontario, which is home to many diverse First Nations, Métis and Inuit people from across Turtle Island, and Toronto is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, sorry, I knew I was going to get that one wrong, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is covered with the Treaty 13 signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are deeply grateful to the generations of people, past and present, who have tended this land, and acknowledgement and abiding wisdom of the dish and one spoon treaty to share and care for it. As settlers, we are thankful for the opportunity and privilege to meet and work here. We seek to move forward with humanity, respect, gratitude, and meaningful relationship buildings. Now I'd like to turn this over to Bilkis Williams. She is our chair and narrator for today. Go ahead, Bilkis, all yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone to today's webinar, the Barriers to Patient Partnership and Equity webinar. This webinar will be recorded and will
Sorry, Bilkis, you just became muted.
Can everyone hear me now? So there'll be time for Q&As at the end of the presentations, but while the presentation is going on, once a bright idea comes to mind, feel free to put those questions in the chat. You can also open the chat from Zoom or by pressing Alt and H keys simultaneously or together. There will be a quick survey now before we begin, just so we know who's here, where you're joining from, and I will move on to introducing our speakers for today. So our speakers are the best people from across Ontario to discuss this issue today, and I'll be introducing them in the order in which they'll be speaking. First is Ron Beleno, is co-chair of the ADREL Network Centers of Excellence Adult and Caregiver Advisory Committee, and there's Shilpa Raju, patient co-lead of the Canadian Donation Transplant Research Program. There's Laura Ferreira-Laguerre, Senior Manager, Public Engagement and Knowledge Translation, ICS. And there's Dr. Nav Prasad, is Canada Research Chair in Health Justice, St. Michael's Hospital. So while we're introducing the guests and people are settling in, please take the time to fill in the poll that you see on your screen. Thank you. I'll take it to John.
Okay, we'll end the poll here and then share the results just to take a look at who is joining us. So we have good participation from across Canada. Most people from Ontario who've responded to the survey. We have a lot of researchers that are participating, as well as patient and caregiver partners and folks from CIHR and level experience. Well, we seem to have a well-experienced group here with patient partnership in research.
Thank you, John. So now we'll move on to Ron Beleno, and he'll be sharing with us insightful perspectives about the barriers to patient partnership and equity. Take it away, Ron.
Thank you, Bilkis. Greetings, everyone. Ron Beleno here, all the way in Toronto. It's a pleasure to see many of the people here that's online. So greetings to those that I do know, and I'm excited for this conversation in the next hour. I myself was let's say, a caregiver to a father that had Alzheimer's and dementia for over 10 years. And my experience in this space has been since around 2015. So give or take 8 years as a patient slash caregiver partner. But I actually didn't realize I was kind of a patient partner until probably around 2018. So I've actually seen my growth in this space as many other patient partners have as well. So that's just something that I want people to realize that as patient partners, we're still growing and we're different stages. Okay, so don't just look at a patient partner as all being equal, all being the same. And a big conversation we're going to be having today is on the diversity piece. Okay, how do we get more diverse voices at the table, or what are the barriers and the strategies to do that? So for me, here's some of my barriers, and I could have a bigger list here. I'm going to start from the very beginning. It's actually the current methods of how we introduce, educate, and onboard potential and new diverse patient partners. I feel that it's very limiting and restrictive at the moment, just the way many of us are doing it. I'm kind of known around innovation and technology. I do a lot of talks on that topic. And as a person who promotes technology, I actually will also say the technology has never been fair. And it actually does create inequities, the digital divide. So all of us are here, but there are many other people that aren't going to make it to this meeting or not even going to be educated on this conversation today. So I see, the process of how we bring in patients as a barrier at this moment. I get it because we had the pandemic and a lot are going online. We've done it online virtually, but I'm going to jump down to one of my strategies that I'm going to say we need to be more boots on the ground. We need to be in the communities more. We need to go where they are and not have them come to us as patient partners. So that is one of the things that I'm going to kind of push here. I made a comment here, especially for new patient partners. I think, John, you're making this larger here, I believe. But anyways, that's okay there. For new patient partners to properly engage in research, the early support about what it means to be engaged, how to be engaged, and the impact that their diversity brings to research is lacking and inconsistent. So that's my personal opinion, that bringing patients on board, there is really no navigator many times as to how they should be engaged, how it works, how to work with researchers. Are we getting better at that? Yes, but I do believe we do lose a lot of potential champions, let's just say, or potential partners at that stage as well. So that is the barrier that I'm throwing out, or the few barriers. And the strategies very quickly here is it's about building relationships. To me, this is not simply a transactional exchange. It's not just the time when we're at meetings with you. We have to create opportunities outside of those official meetings to build those relationships, whether that's trying to go for coffee, doing something, if it is virtually, spending quality time just getting to know the patient partners as well. So that's one piece. And then I do believe we got to kind of increase some peer mentoring programs and onboarding programs for new or interested patient partners. So as I said, boots on the ground and in the communities, and invest in upstream and invest earlier to improve the narrative of how we tell the story to potential patient partners about what patient engagement is in research. So those are a few of my comments there that I'd like to share.
Thank you so much, Ron. So I would have to ask the other panelists if they have any comments or suggestions. Ron has just highlighted tech restrictions and how they pose a barrier to patient engagement, as well as solutions such as investment programs, peer mentorship, and onboarding programs that will enable us to overcome these barriers. So I'd like to invite the other panelists to comment on this. Shilpa, take it away.
Yeah, I can make one comment. So I'm speaking again from the experience, and I'll speak to this a little bit in my piece, but as a patient partner within the transplant and donation space and the research that's done in there. And so within the CDTRP, which is the Canadian Donation and Transplantation Research Program, there we have a designated person that works as a patient, like PFD, patient family donor, partnership and knowledge mobilization manager. And so this is someone who's like in the research network embedded to help facilitate some of this connecting with from researchers to the patient partners. And I think having someone like that too is a good resource even for the research community and the academics to be able to think about like, okay, if we're struggling to do this, what's a meaningful way of engaging with our patient partners? How can we onboard them better? I think that having like within your own research spaces, there are likely resources and people embedded in those networks that you can then rely on to help with both the engagement piece, the recruitment piece, and then even just onboarding as well. What are some of the ways that, or tools or ideas or things that have been done with other researchers, perhaps even just to think about how you might want to go about doing it in your own projects.
Thanks, Shilpa. Does anyone else want to comment? I know that Laura is a knowledge translator for ICES. She may also have insight very similar to yours. So Laura, would you like to comment?
Sure, thank you so much. And thank you, Ron. This is a great thing to bring up. And I think it's something that's really highlighted in a lot of the work that we do as well. So as Bilkis mentioned, at ICS, we also have a public advisory council, and we do work with scientists and researchers to help them integrate public or patient perspectives in their own projects. And I think the only thing I would add on here is that something that we've noticed is that onboarding isn't kind of just a one-time event either. Like sometimes these like ongoing capacity building opportunities can be really important, and kind of coming back not only again for the patients or the public who are involved, but even potentially the researchers as well. Like there's always so much information, tools, and resources in this area that are expanding and growing. Even for my own self, kind of being up to date with the literature and new practices, I find really helpful. So yeah, just kind of considering in your own project, maybe it's not just a one-time orientation, but really thinking about how you can expand capacity for your patients or partners through the whole experience.
Yeah, Laura, I just want to comment on that very quickly. Yeah, it's not, that's a good example. It's not like that one-time exchange where it just happens there. It is a relationship. That's why I come back to. There's a little bit of a relationship building, and it can't always be very structured and formal. So yeah, rarely is it one time. And again, invest in my opinion, at that point, upstream at the beginning, for a higher return. Okay, a higher return in the longer run. That's what I'm looking at here. And this is not just for individuals, this is even for those communities, those specific diverse communities, right? So finding those champions, those leaders where you help cheer them on, support them, and then they will bring others on board as well. So yes.
Thanks, Ron, for echoing and supporting those comments. That's really important. Dr. Nav, would you have anything to add to it?
Sure. Yeah, really great comments. I really appreciated the comment about champions. I think that can be really important. And I also just want to emphasize the comments around technology not always being the solution. And I think sometimes too much emphasis is placed on like little gimmicks or technological solutions when we really need to be looking at things more systematically and looking at like what are the fundamental issues. And yes, obviously technology can be very helpful, but we shouldn't get distracted by it.
Thanks, Dr. Nav. That's very insightful. So I'd like to invite Shilpa now to share with us the barriers that she would like for us to explore, as well as solutions. Take it away, Shilpa.
Thanks, Bilkis. So I'll introduce myself really quickly. I did mention, or Bilkis actually gave a great intro. I'm one of the patient co-leads in the Canadian Donation and Transplantation Research Network program. And for that, I guess my background as a patient, I had a double lung transplant 11 years ago. Prior to that I had cancer recovered. And since then, I'm also currently on dialysis and working up for kidney transplant. So quite engaged with the system as a patient. My background in my career is as an epidemiologist in public health. So I have kind of both of these pieces that do play into the way that I engage, I guess, with the data and with the program, and then as a patient. So one of the barriers that I'm going to speak to, again, is from my experience. One of the benefits patient partners bring to this health research is the sharing of lived experience and perspective. And so, as I mentioned, I'm coming at this from a variety of perspectives based on my education, my cultural, ethnic background, and then my experience as a patient going through the system. And one of the things that I've noticed, even just in the research network that I participate in, a lot of the researchers and scientists and physicians, it is quite diverse. There is quite a lot of representation from various ethnic, cultural backgrounds. But when I look at the patient engagement side, I find I'm one of the only people of color, South Asian. Again, I see myself very well represented in the physicians and the researchers, but less in the group of patients that are part of this particular network. And so I think one of the things that we've seen is that in general, and this is across research, often self-identified patient partners are more sociodemographically homogenous groups, often predominantly white, university-educated women. Also another group that we've seen commonly are able to participate, retired individuals, again, from a similar background. And I think that narrow range of perspectives can potentially limit the benefit and value and relevance of health research evidence that you're getting from patient engagement, especially research that focuses on racialized and vulnerable populations or includes those populations. So the piece that I wanted to focus on was maybe how do we start engaging more diverse patient partners? And I think there's less strategies. Some of the bigger ideas are like consider in your research the breadth of people that are impacted by the research or the question that you're trying to answer, and think about, when you are engaging patient partners, are they adequately represented in that group of people? And if not, why? And then this is the other piece around that is the barriers that might be limiting their participation. So some of the things I think Ron also mentioned was, related to recruitment. How are you getting, what are some of the maybe different ways you can get different patients involved, different diverse patients involved? So some of this might be even reaching out through less standard or common methods. Maybe you make connections with community organizations or advocacy groups, local nonprofits, groups that may represent specific ethnic cultural communities that may even be focused on certain health conditions. They do exist, they're out there. It's just, it might be a little bit more work and a little bit more daunting to try and approach. But I think if you're able to find even one person, a champion, that's also like a way in. And another piece might be thinking about scheduling of the meetings. So if they're happening during work hours, after work hours, does it limit who you're able to bring in? So the type of work that people might be in, is this flexible? And then I know there's been some mention of the virtual option, but broaden it from that too. Like, are there in-person options? If there are, how, again, think about scheduling, think about what other supports might need to be there. It is a little bit more, it is more work, and no one won't deny that, but the idea is that it's worthwhile. Another piece would be language considerations. Again, think about all the people we might be missing in the patient caregiver populations. And I'm from Toronto, it is very diverse here. But again, like thinking about Canada, if you want to be getting some of these perspectives, you're missing a whole bunch of people if you don't have some thought maybe to how we might be able to involve people who may not be as comfortable with English as their first language. Is it a consideration? Can you think about having an interpreter? And the last thing I won't go too much into either, just because we have talked about it a little bit in the onboarding piece. But to extend on that, maybe one of the things I was thinking about was the roles and responsibilities and stuff. And when you're onboarding your patient partners, getting them caught up to speed on the work that's been done, like you in a way that they're able to understand it. So something like a lay language summary, or also getting to know your patient partners. Another piece of that is getting to know what other skills they may have. I mean, I mentioned my career outside of being a patient is a very specific other health focused career, but people have a wide variety of non-patient life things. They may be working in comms, maybe that's something they have, maybe they're connected to other patient organizations, and it may not be something, or cultural organizations, it may not be something that connects right away, but maybe this is down the line for future research, could prove to be an important network connection. So I think all of those things, and then also someone mentioned, I think Laura mentioned, it might have been Laura or Nav might have mentioned, you know, there's not a one-time engagement, you keep coming back to it. I think the piece about another extension to that is asking for feedback. Like, okay, so you meet with them before a meeting, maybe to get them caught up, maybe after the first couple of meetings, a touch base to see how did you feel that went, being a part of it, were you comfortable? I think getting that ongoing feedback. And then the last thing I'm going to say that is, I think, really important also is follow up when their work is being, or when their input is being incorporated into the product or the work you're doing, sharing that back so that they're able to see the impact of their contributions. So I said a lot of things, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Shilpa. I appreciate it. Thank you for that insightful conversation. So if you're just joining us, I'll give you a brief summary of the conversation so far. So we've covered topics from tech accommodations in order to support sustainable practices, investments in patient engagement, such as multiple capacity building, electing champions in diverse communities. Also, we've discussed, you know, evolving patient partnerships from homogeneous patient engagement groups to include more diversities as well, especially during recruitment and participation. We've also said that, you know, when engaging patient partners, lay language summaries of the work that's been done so far should be given to participants. And as well, we should endeavor to infuse patient expertise outside of being a patient into patient partner research engagements. So I'll now invite the rest of the panelists to comment on Shilpa's presentation, if there's any.
Okay, I'll go first. So Shilpa, thank you. 2 points on my end here. So even in the chat there, it's about the scheduling. So I've been a big fan is to not give my schedule. What is your schedule? And we'll go to your community. So an example in the Filipino community that I'm from, my mom's dance group, right? So I even brought some researchers on their Saturday after their social, right? And they were more engaged there. So we come to meet where they're at. So that's for me, again, boots on the ground. So that's just the one piece of that scheduling, trying to adapt to them. And that was a good relationship. But also who goes there? There's, you know, like I know, for example, Nav, you're probably quite busy, you know, Laura, all the researchers, but you have your students, you have the next crowd that's coming up. Okay, teach them how to go out into the community, right? So it's also them, in my opinion, that, hey, go out and create those relationships. So that's kind of what I'm also looking at as well here to bring on board there.
Thanks, Ron. Dr. Nav, would you like to contribute to that? You've been highlighted as a researcher of worth, and we're looking to you to see how you're hoping to engage the next group of researchers in community internship.
Sure. Great. Thank you. And yeah, I'm not as busy as you might think, Ron. Actually, probably, I think thinking about everyone else on this panel seems like I'd probably be the least busy person here, but happy to be part of the panel. And yeah, so I agree with Ron's comment about wanting to build capacity for the next generation of researchers. Also, Shilpa's comments about the ongoing feedback really resonated with me. I know for our community guidance panel, for a study we did on access to medicines, what we found is one of the most important aspects of that was reporting back to the patients and community members about what we did with previous discussions. So we moved to doing that at the beginning of each meeting. And that seemed to be both important to underscoring that we were actually making decisions and changes based on the discussion. And it was also an opportunity to get feedback on the process. So, and I agreed with all of the other comments about the how in terms of scheduling, et cetera. So really very supportive of everything you said, Shilpa.
Laura, any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And Shilpa, you did a great job kind of highlighting not only, again, kind of as we just talked about with the onboarding, like this is very much an ongoing process. It's, you start thinking about it at recruitment stage, and then you kind of carry it forward with how you're scheduling the meetings, you know, where you're kind of meeting people at. So I really appreciated that. And I think this resonated a lot as we start to think about recruitment for next year for our own advisory council. We're thinking about a lot of these things. And I think the only thing I would add is that we even started to think about, you know, what voices haven't been reflected in our work, in our panel before. So who are we missing? And, you know, again, it's not just the recruitment stage. How do we ensure when we do have these folks who typically haven't been on our council, how do we make sure that they feel included and part of the work going forward? So very much an ongoing strategy. And I really appreciate that you highlighted that.
Thank you so much, Laura, and the rest of the panelists for contributing to that conversation. Now we'll be moving on to Dr. Nav to hear his insights as well. Dr. Nav, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really pleased, Vilkas, to be part of the panel. So thank you all for inviting me. The panel is really great, and we've had a really great discussions so far. So hopefully there's one or two things I could add here. And I think we had really great discussions about how to engage people. Maybe I want to take a little bit of a step back and focus a bit more on why. You know, just this week we had a patient encounter in our clinic that I've been reflecting on, and I won't get into details about the clinical issue, but the upshot is a patient who has experienced discrimination, racialized person seeking care at our institution, didn't receive the care that she was expecting. And, you know, I just did a follow-up phone call with her about it. And I had this talk on my mind, and I was thinking to myself, what if that had been your experience, where you had a negative encounter in a healthcare institution, and then you read some statement of that institution talking about diversity and inclusion, and how the institution is 100% committed to equity, and they have a zero tolerance approach to inequities or discrimination. And then on top of that, they said, oh, we're looking to get input from patients on how we should do this research project or how we should redesign this clinical service. I mean, how would you feel, you know, if you had just been declined a service? Would you be eager to participate, you know, in some sort of process, focus groups, or a committee? Or would you be more likely to think, they're lying, you know, they are actually not interested in equity, and it's just going to be a waste of my time. They're going to, you know, take my picture, put it on the homepage of the website, make it seem like they've consulted when they really, you know, are discriminating against me. So I think, you know, if we're going to address inequities, which hopefully is a shared goal, we have to make sure that we're actually doing the work, and, you know, we're doing projects that are truly focused on addressing inequities that affect people on a daily basis, you know, that can put people's lives at risk. So I think really that could be the first step in terms of hoping to ensure that we engage with people who reflect the diversity of the community we're serving, reflect the diversity of Canada, is to first focus on actually doing the equity work and choosing important topics. And I'm drawing here partially from our the Ontario SPOR support unit's equity framework that you can find on the OSSU website. And I think in general, and I think this is maybe building on some of the things Shilpa and Ron have said, it's important to be upfront and honest about the process from the very beginning, how it's going to unfold, how input's going to be used, what sorts of decisions have already been made. And I think that's especially important when we're talking about addressing inequities, because many projects that are ostensibly about addressing inequities can end up being about collecting data or describing a problem without actually moving towards action. And if we are engaging with people and occupying people's time, we have to make sure that something really comes of it. So yeah, I mean, we've already had some great discussions about the how. Maybe I will leave it there for my reflections on the why. And I see that the URL for the equity framework has been shared. So thanks very much for doing that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nav, for an insightful conversation. If you're just joining us, what he's just discussed are the whys of patient engagement. Why is there a need for patient engagement? Why do you as a researcher need to engage patients? Why should they trust you? How do you say it? The onus is on you to prove that you're beyond suspicion, that they can trust you, to build integrity in this community so that patients can put their lives and their information, their data, their worries, their concerns, and also the successes that they've had in certain areas with you, so that we can truly move patient care forward. And Dr. Nav also said something about, grand statements and then not being directly proportional to practice. So you may call this, oh my God, we're the best hospital in the world, but in real life, you're not really impacting patients in the way that they wish to be cared for. So do you want to be remembered for truly life-changing practice, or you don't want to walk the talk? So walk in their shoes and see how patients are going to react to you when they start engaging. So I just had to give a brief summary of that, because that was really powerful, just as the other conversations we've been having. And I was hoping to catch someone who just came into the conversation and give them a highlight of what we've been discussing so far. So will any of the other panelists love to contribute to that conversation?
Yeah, I can chime in first, and thanks so much, Nav. Those were really great points. And I think, again, it's something we don't often kind of step back and think about, okay, why are we doing this? Why is this important? And I think just to build on that a little bit too is coming back to the why of, when you take something to community or patients or the public and you want to engage, what is the purpose of your engagement? Is it for face value? Are you just taking something and saying, okay, I just need your feedback, give this back to me, and that's kind of the end of the engagement? Because I think it's also important to kind of think about, for a true kind of equity-focused engagement, to really think about that co-design piece. And, how can I involve communities in actually co-designing this and, taking this project on a longer term and really thinking about how we can address the needs and desires of communities in a way that's impactful. So I think we'll just add that piece as well. And thanks for making these comments.
Thank you, Laura. Shilpa, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I think now your comment, I feel like that piece that you mentioned, even on the equity statements for organizations, I think that also even extends to research and what patient engagement is considered now, almost like it is the thing that they're supposed to check off. It gets you like another point as far as the funding or whatever the case may be. And it's the same thing. I think thinking about it beyond that is really, really important, because otherwise it's just it's the tokenism. I think some people have posted about that in the chat. Another really great comment in the chat that, has constantly resonated with me even outside of this is, think about this if this was you, or if this was your parent or your child or your friend, if this was the care or the research is going to impact them in some way, what are the things that you want to consider, and don't you want them to be involved in the work you're doing, to make sure that you're kind of thinking about this bigger than just the I guess the immediate science gain or the benefit side, but also taking a more holistic look at the work that you're doing. So
thanks, Shilpa, for echoing what Michael Kirk has said in the chat. We might have to add him to our panel next time. He's really dropping some gems in the chat. So Ron, Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I'm appreciating the comments in the chat there, and I'm going to continue that tokenism comment there that Shannon put there, and Shilpa, you continued on. I've come across that as well myself many times, and I've been on so many research projects by now. I know when it's like, okay, Ron, the application date is due tomorrow. Can we put your name on there, right? Researchers are guilty of that. I get it, but it's time that they shift and do the homework ahead of time and say, no, this is more important. Let's get that relationship. And it's many times it's not me. I'm not the best one. And I said, well, there's some other better people, but I'll support you for this time. But next time, please don't. Do your homework and do create those relationships. So that's one piece, the tokenism conversation. And then Laura, you kind of also talked about the why. That's huge. Okay, that comes back to, again, for me, the onboarding at the beginning. It's like many of them still aren't clear why they're doing this. And we need to have those conversations early, back and forth, not why just for the patient, but why would Nav or Laura or any researcher, what's your why, right? And to understand what's the intent for us to work together. So those conversations should happen very early. And the way I usually, my last tip on this is that the way that works for me in the patient space is I ask about the feelings. After the conversations, how do you feel? How is that conversation, with the researcher or with each other? How do you feel about what we're working on? Does this make sense to you? And that feeling, sometimes you'll hear the answer and you can reverse engineer, say, okay, they're not getting it because I didn't communicate it properly, or there's a gap somewhere here. So I like to kind of have those feeling conversations along the way. And I see Shilpa wants to kind of chime in on that as well. Yeah.
Not in the feeling conversation, but I just remembered one more thing too, related to the story that Nav shared. I think it's also really important to think about the patients who haven't had the best experiences, because there's going to be people who have had very positive experiences who might be more motivated to be engaged. But the person who's had that challenging experience, they may have some really insightful feedback. Like if this person was feeling that the experience they had didn't resonate with what the organization or the institution's mission statement, whatever was, and they felt that way, then that's actually a really important piece for the organization or the researchers or the institution to be thinking about. What are they saying here? And I guess that might be, you're right, it might be a little bit more challenging to get that patient on board if they think this is so dissonant from what they've experienced. But I wonder if there's a way to have that conversation, to maybe be able to take that experience and use that to drive or help inform change, rather than it like just being there and being an overall negative experience that then, like, I don't know, doesn't go any further than that, because it does have potential to move the needle.
Shilpa, just last comment on that as well, that yes, we've lost so many patient, potential partners and champions because of that one experience or that one negative story, that there was no support afterwards to kind of have them have that conversation. Again, whether that's with a fellow patient partner, a peer, or even with that research team or whoever. So yeah, we've lost a lot. I know that for sure. It's harder to get people back than to kind of continue and support that relationship early on. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Ron and Shilpa, for that back and forth. I love it when the conversation gets feisty. We'll move on to Laura, and please take it away.
Sure, thanks so much, Bilkis. So I'm going to kind of end things off here on the last barrier. And so as I mentioned, in my role, I work a lot with different scientists, researchers who want to engage public or the patients in their project, and maybe don't always know where to start or kind of really how to go about this. So when thinking about that barrier, I was thinking, sometimes we do hear there's a bit of apprehension from researchers to kind of actually start to do this work. And there could be sometimes even the perception that, this work takes a lot of time. It could cost a lot of money in my grant. And it could just be really challenging. And there's the worry that you won't execute it well. And sometimes that apprehension can just merely be a symptom of not having the resources or the supports to kind of do this work. And I think this is especially true. We were just talking about the equity focus as well. I think especially for equity deserving communities, they have been historically excluded from research, and there's been unintentional harm or even stigmatization when not always thinking about these groups or properly engaging. So my barrier is really just thinking about how do we do this work with researchers and scientists, especially engagement that's equity centered, And how do we kind of help that apprehension or those who are unfamiliar with the benefits of the work? So I kind of have a few strategies here, and I divided them up a little bit into things that are kind of more an individual level, some maybe in an organization, if that's where you are, and then at kind of a higher system level, things that might need to happen. So for the individual level, I think, even just in conversations with other researchers, I think it's important that we emphasize really the importance of this work. Why is it important? And a few examples are, more competitive grants now are making this a requirement, and asking researchers to think more critically about how to engage different groups in their research. And kind of hand in hand in that, some journals actually also have requirements for an element of engagement, or at least outlining that a little bit more clearer. The other element here is that sometimes if, that's research that's focusing on data use, there could be encouragement to engage, or even it's actually a requirement to engage. So for example, with Indigenous or First Nation data as well. And then finally, just thinking about how this work can increase accessibility of your research and really bridge the gap between kind of communities and research about them. I think if you're thinking at an organizational level, like how do we support our researchers in doing this? Again, I think it's just kind of making that guide. There's so many existing tools and resources out there now, kind of building that repertoire so that there's easily a place to go for support, training, especially for new scientists who maybe aren't as familiar. And even giving examples of research that's been done with engagement that's been done really well. So how can you provide examples or kind of testimonials almost in that sense? And then finally, at a system level, I think we've talked about some of these things too, just in terms of the barriers for people engaging. But really, kind of the first thing, obviously, is supporting engagement as a priority area. And then thinking about promoting budget allowance that makes these opportunities more accessible. So I think it was Shilpa that mentioned, covering costs for transportation, potentially childcare that could be a barrier for folks, making it a more central venue, covering costs for meals. So kind of all those things that should be also supported as like a financial budget level as well. So I'll just stop there, but yeah, that was kind of a summary of what I've been seeing.
Thank you so much, Laura. So Laura's just extended the conversation to another level. She's just said that purpose is really important. All experiences are valid, and support at every level is important so that you can elicit the experiences of each person or the persons you're engaging. Also help them to eliminate apprehension and hesitation, because after you've done that, you're able to elicit experiences that are either negative so that the system can be restructured. You can elicit positive experiences so that you can improve on your services, or so that you can know that positive examples exist in real life and that these possibilities are doable. Because most people say, oh my God, it can't be done. It can't be done. You just have to be patient. It takes time. There's the bureaucracy and the paper writing and the signage and everything. But there's places where these things already exist. There's possibilities already in practice, and they're no longer novel practices. And I know that people in the chat, like Shannon, Claire, and Becky, they agree with me because they're echoing these thoughts. And so I'd like to invite all the other panelists to pitch in. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, so Laura, I'm going to chime in that I'm a fan when you mentioned about how many of the funders are required, and grants are requiring now that, there's a budget line, let's say, or there's budget put aside for patient partners. So one group I'm with is AgeWell, Canada's Technology and Aging Network. That is a requirement that patient partners or older adults and caregivers, is what we call it over there, are with all research projects or innovation projects, that there's a funding there. I'm just putting a challenge out there, planting the seed for any of the funders. Why don't we have a game and reverse it? Why don't you let the patient partners, Shilpa and myself, get the funding, and then we decide how we bring in the researchers and we take the lead. So if there was something who wants to pilot that and say, okay, let's see how we operate. So you give the money to us and we'll see how we budget it for the work. Just an idea there. So
Thanks. Dr. Nab, would you like to add anything to it?
Sure. Well, I like that suggestion from Ron, actually. I think that could really refocus minds on what's important if the patients were holding the purse strings. I really appreciated Laura's comments, all of them, especially the ones about hesitations from researchers or concerns from researchers that can get in the way of meaningful engagement. And maybe I'll just add to that by saying, I think we should put some of these concerns in context. Some of the same concerns could be applied to researchers when they're thinking about collaborating with other researchers, like how collaborating with, researchers in a different discipline or research or consulting with certain statisticians can slow things down. They have different ideas. They suggest doing things in a different way. It can sometimes be difficult to find a time to meet with them, et cetera. All of those things apply to other researchers, but we don't usually view them as a reason not to engage with other researchers, to do research projects by yourself. So we need to, I think, appropriately place in context some of the concerns, which are valid. I mean, certainly it is true that engaging with patients does require thought and resources and time to do it well. So I don't think that, the answer to the concern is that it's not going to require time, but the answer is that it's worth it and it's similar to other requirements of doing research properly.
Thanks, Dr. Nav. Tony, Stuart, and Caroline agree with you. They've said, power can change hands. Power should change hands so that, the patient partners can do the scheduling. They can help to direct the allocation of resources during research, patient partnerships and patient engagements in research. And I hope that any of our other panelists might have further insights to contribute to this conversation before we move on.
Just some last, no, everyone said really great things. I love Ron's idea of us taking over the funding process for research that gets done. That would be amazing. But even speaking of that, we've seen that, I mean, not to the point that we're funding the research, but within the CDTRP, one of the grant applications that we do have, it's an innovation grant application, and we part of the committee that scores and helps decide which research projects do end up getting funded. Patients are now part of that. It's taken years. This has been a progression over years to now where the point where our scores actually do also contribute to the decision around which projects do get the funding. Laura, I loved how you broke it down at multiple levels, kind of at the ways we can think about this from the researcher side, because that is it. It kind of has to start from there. The engagement piece has to come from the outreach has to come from that side. So I think, yeah, there are a lot of supports and a lot of resources available. And to Nav's point, it's not that it's not going to be an investment, but it's the idea is that investment is worth it. And then that means that the impact also is greater and better. So yeah, I don't have much more to add to that.
Thank you. But before I go ahead to Laura, I see that some persons in the chat, they're asking about, the progress that's been made so far, alluding to what Shilpa has just said. There's some progress that's been made, but we're looking to move at the pace that the world needs for us to quickly come to the kind of achievements that we're looking to do. We claim to be world-class, and we want to be world-class. Banke has asked about what is the appropriate reimbursement. And I think you'd be very interested, Banke, in previous webinars from OSU, where we've discussed this at length. There's already, there's established reimbursement frameworks and guidelines that are now being used across board when researchers engage patients. Elizabeth, Diane, Claire, Anna, and Sandra, they've all asked different questions about the conversations that have been going on so far. I'm just going to say, ring your horses. Q&A will be in a few seconds. Laura, take it away and give us the last words of wisdom. Thank you.
No, I don't think I have anything further to add. Really appreciate these additional comments from everyone kind of just building on this piece. So yeah, really nothing further to add. It's been great listening to all these comments.
Thank you so much, Laura. Calvin?
There we go. Couldn't find my mic. Thank you so much, Laura and Ron and Shipla and Nav. Great conversations today. I really enjoyed it. I know as a patient researcher or partner, it's some of the organizations are hitting it bang on. Like with the Toronto, they include you right from square one and several patients on all their committees, right from the designing of their projects and their questions in the research. And so does the University of Toronto or the UHN. They do the same thing to the point, even when they're applying for their grants and bursaries and all that stuff, they include patients in that. So some people are taking the time to do all this. So it's great to see patients pushing it now from your perspectives and the researchers and really trying to make this a broad understanding that, you know, you need all this in your research team. And I agree with everybody. They have to get back to everybody that's involved in the research, let you know the outcome. And if they don't do that, then, you know, what's the use of doing the project? Did you get it right? Did you get it wrong? I mean, there's so many answers left to be had. And I'm just looking at down through here, and I have not spotted one question come across that I can read out to all the participants, but there sure has been a lot of sites to click on. And if you can take the time and look at those, some of them I've already done that just when they first started popping up. But there's, you know, some really good research areas to, you know, get involved in. Now, does anybody on the panel have one last thing they would like to say? We still got 5 minutes left.
Calvin, it's Ron.
Yeah,
Exactly to like a lot of the links here. So I sometimes like to say that I feel when we have these events and webinars, we're preaching to the choir many times. Okay, that sometimes everyone here is already on board with patient engagement. Most of it, it's just a question of how do we level up and get better at it. For me, it's about how do we communicate this out broader? How do we tell the story about this work that we're all doing creatively as well, right? So to all the stakeholders, that's what I'm going to push for. Everyone that's on board, not just the panelists. That's not who I'm talking to here. It's to the attendees. It's what can you do to multiply your impact of how you're doing the work. Okay, so there's a lot of tips here. Just that's what I'm trying to throw out. Keep talking about it. Keep pushing it out there in some way. So.
Yeah, I agree, Ron. Anybody else want to chime in on this?
I mean, I think we had a really great discussion. I mean, the one thing I'd emphasize is just thinking about the why in addition to the how.
Laura, I saw you unmuted and wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was just going to add to what I like about these events. And as we saw from the chat, there's always so much idea sharing and knowledge sharing that I think even just having these discussions and then having other people chime in, I always take away so much. So really appreciate the engagement going on in the chat as well.
At this point, we would like to thank all of our panelists for insightful presentations. You were successful in engineering our audience to engage. This is the most engaged audience I've had in a webinar for a long time, especially a lunchtime webinar, because people are just eating and they're just looking, they're not really interested. So we even have champions in the chat. We're going to be reaching out to them once we start doing engagements. Thank you to the audience for feeding insightful discussions with your comments and your links and resources that you're sharing with us. And thank you to everyone for echoing positive steps in the direction of possibilities. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you for contributing. We'll see you another time.
Thank you. We also had a really great chair, Bilkis. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Bilkis.
Thanks so much for having us. Bye.